On the wall behind you, right over here, that photograph, that's Fort Pierce Inlet, 1944. Everything you see in that photograph is a Navy training base. And this huge area here, this was the Amphibious training base, and this is where the Navy was training for the invasion of Normandy. From the inlet on, almost up to Vero Beach, that was the training ground for the Navy Combat Demolition Unit, Scouts and Raiders, OSS Maritime Units, and the Frogmen of World War II. This base was roughly 25 miles in length, and a little over 2 years, the Navy put over 130,000 trainees through here. So this is where Navy Special Warfare began, right here.
Still the base.
You've heard me with my tricky questions. You know, how many soldiers are actually all sailors?
Right, right.
And they were Navy Combat Demolition Unit, and it was guys like that that did the demolition work on the obstructions.
All right, we're rolling.
Okay, now, all right, let's start at the beginning of World War, around 1944. The backdrop on these two panels here, this is aerial views of the training base that was here in 1944. This is the only thing that was left of the whole training base, and that's the Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station. That still exists.
Today?
Today, yeah. Now, if you look up here, you can see the luxury that these guys lived in. They had these beautiful
Those are really
condominiums.
nice.
Yes. Yeah, they had hot and cold running maids, everything. It's just
Can't see the pool because they're on the other side.
Yeah, they you know, sipping a julep. You know. Here they're learning infiltration, exfiltration from a moving boat.
That's that loop.
Right, that's that loop. This guy's got that loop. You can't see it because he has to hold his arm up, catch it in the loop, then he catches his wrist, and then he swings him aboard the inflatable boat, like it's a tuna, and then the guy jumps into this boat, which is a big power boat here.
And they have this boat outside. Two of them, right, out here?
Well, that's actually, well, similar to it, yeah, but not quite the exact same
I just
thing.
remember on the display board, it said that they always attached a rubber raft to the side
Right.
of it. And
Yeah, but, and they also run the power boat to the beach side. So the inflatable boat is to the outside, to the ocean side, and that way the guys on the beach can't see what's going on. And the thing is with this guy here now, if he misses that loop and there's shooting going on, they don't come back for him. It's a one-shot deal. You better make sure you catch that
You
loop.
better be good at that.
Yeah. So the dog there, you want to step on. These are Scouts and Raiders. Here they're learning how to go down, actually do zip lining and so on.
That's fun. I like doing that.
These guys here, they did have some athletics. They had baseball, they had football, they had basketball, they had dances. They learned some hand-to-hand combat. Here he's taking out a sentry without making any noise. You put him on his knees, put your knee in his back, double him back, and then just slit his throat. So that way you take him out, he doesn't make any noise. They also had dress parades down here through the middle of Fort Pierce. This was a huge town of 8,000 at the time. See here another Navy dance. The explosives that they were playing with was not exactly 4th of July type stuff.
What's up with that's a 50 cal round,
Yeah,
isn't
that
it?
was found on one of the beaches around
Oh,
here.
okay,
Yeah.
that's why it's all corroded.
Yeah, it's all corroded and yucky. We can blow water 200 feet in the air. It takes a lot of power. So, like I said, they're not exactly playing with toys here. A lot of the original trainees here were actually Seabees because they were already trained in explosives, so they had a leg up on it.
I've always said the military has the best toys.
Oh yeah, they have some good toys. Another aerial view of the training base here. And this is what the beach and back would have looked like in World War II. There's miles and miles of all of these obstructions.
This is Florida?
Yeah, this is the beach right out back here.
Jeez, Pete.
Yeah. Now, what actually happened here? Okay. This is Draper Kaufman. Draper Kaufman graduated Annapolis 1933. Unlike all of his shipmates, he did not get his commission as an officer. Why? Because his eyesight was bad. He did not pass the physical. So he successfully graduated at Annapolis, walked out of there with his diploma, and that was the end of it. But he was not happy with that. He had to get into the action, so he became an ambulance driver in France. He was captured by the Germans and held as a prisoner of war. And then they finally released him. They had no real reason to keep him. As an ambulance driver, he's a non-combatant. As an American, we were neutral at the time. So they gave him a passport and a list of countries that he could go to. They said, on no conditions can you go to England. Okay, you don't tell an American you can't go someplace. So he went to England. And he got a commission in the Royal Navy. That's why you see him with the British officer's hat on. And they made him a sub-lieutenant, which would be a Lieutenant JG in our Navy. And he became one of the world's foremost experts in bomb disposal and demolition. During the London Blitz, he was actually digging up unexploded German bombs and defusing them. And in some cases, some of those bombs were 30 feet into the ground. That's how big they were and how fast they were going when they hit the ground. His dad, in the meantime, was a high-ranking Navy officer who happened to be a personal friend of Admiral Nimitz. So he's talking to Admiral Nimitz, and he mentioned how sad Draper was that he didn't get his commission. Admiral Nimitz said, well, why didn't he get his commission? Well, his eyesight was no good. So Admiral Nimitz said, his eyesight can't be that bad. So Draper comes home on rotation from England and immediately gets his commission in the American Navy. By the way, he eventually retired as a rear admiral. That's his 2-star flag right there. One of his early assignments was to go to Pearl Harbor and defuse a 500-pound unexploded Japanese bomb. He also established 2 bomb disposal schools. Then finally the Navy gave him a blank check and said, here's what you're going to do, Draper. You are going to establish a school for demolition, and you're going to do it in the water. You can go any way you want in the United States. You can have anything you want to make a base. Get it done. He traveled the country, came here to Fort Pierce, loved what he saw. Big amphibious training base just a mile south of us. Miles of unspoiled beaches. These were uninhabited islands in World War II. Climate that's relatively good year-round, and on these grounds is where he started his base. He established the training base here, and eventually he left and became commanding officer of UDT Team 5. He actually took part in 4 amphibious landings in the Pacific. He was at Saipan, Tinian, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. After the war, his career continued on, and by the way, he was highly decorated. He won the Navy Cross twice, the Navy Cross, and 1 step below the Medal of Honor. And one of his final assignments, and this is comical, is he became the commanding officer of the Naval Academy. Now here he is, the commanding officer of the very school that didn't make him an officer in the first place. So, I mean, just go figure the way the Navy works, right? He died on vacation in Budapest of a massive heart attack. He was sorely missed. He was a great officer. Didn't expect his men to do anything he couldn't do as well as or better than they were.
It's a sign of a true leader.
Yep, he was an excellent leader. If he had his men out here on a 2-mile swim, he was swimming right with them. I mean, he was that good. Now let's take a look at who was actually trained here. This case here, this man is Scouts and Raiders. This was a joint Army-Navy operation, and Scouts and Raiders went ashore on enemy-held beaches at night, and they would do reconnaissance on the beach. They would map the beach out. They did have some explosives with them if they had to use them, and they had to leave the beach so that it was absolutely pristine in the morning. There was no evidence that they were there, and the final thing they did was to get a bucket of sand off each beach. The bucket of sand was taken back, was analyzed to see if it would take the weight of jeeps, trucks, and tanks during an invasion. And if the sand was no good, the beach was no good, so they'd just write that off and go elsewhere. Scouts and Raiders were a top secret group. Part of it became part of the OSS. So if you know anything about World War II history, that was a big spy group that we had. And also, they became part of the OSS Maritime Unit, and the OSS after the war morphed into the CIA. So these guys were actually the forerunners then of the CIA. The NCDU, the Navy Combat Demolition Unit, we already talked about them. They did the demolition work on the beaches in Europe. They did not go to the Pacific. They mostly did the landing at Normandy, southern France, and some of the other landings. The ultimate warrior that was trained here was the Frogman of World War II, the naked warrior. He went into battle just as you see him right there. The only thing that resembled a uniform was the swim trunks that he was wearing. He had a face mask, he had swim fins, no snorkel, they weren't invented yet. Around his neck he has a slate and a writing instrument, which in this case is a broken pencil. Around his waist he has an inflatable life belt. Below that is a duty belt with a K-bar knife on it. The K-bar knife was used to cut the primer cord, which set off the explosives that he carried in the Agassiz pack over his shoulder. He would carry about 35 pounds of explosives in that bag and a length of primer cord. Primer cord in and of itself was nasty stuff. If you took a piece of primer cord 5 miles in length and you detonated it, it would be completely gone in less than 1 second. Wow. This was nasty stuff. Yeah. Now on his feet, he has coral shoes. The soles of those shoes were made out of old automobile tires, and that would stand up under the razor-sharp coral. On his wrist there, he has a piece of string with knots in it and a fish weight, and that was used to measure water depth. Now, one of the early amphibious landings in the Pacific was Tarawa. Tarawa was a total disaster because the Navy used aerial reconnaissance, and believe it or not, reconnaissance through the periscope of a submerged submarine. So the first wave went through okay. The second wave, now the tide is starting to go out, and the landing craft is starting to run aground, in some cases over 1,000 yards off the beach. So there they are, high and dry, they can't move, they drop the ramp, the Marines run off, 40% of them drowned before they even reached the beach. Almost all the rest of them were all killed on the way in because they were helpless, floundering around in deep water. So the Navy says we have to know how deep the water is. So what they do is lay on the surface, drop this weight down, record that depth, and make channels so that the landing craft could get in. In 1958, Admiral Ollie Burke decided that it would be nice if we had an elite Navy Special Warfare Group started. He ran it before President Kennedy, who in 1961 announced that he was going to develop a specialized elite Navy Special Warfare Group. That was the birth of the SEALs. In January 1962, SEAL Teams 1 and 2 were commissioned. SEAL Team 1 stayed on the West Coast, SEAL Team 2 came to the East Coast, and even today, all the odd-numbered teams are on the West Coast, even-numbered teams on the East Coast. If you remember the early space program, space capsules come down in the water, in the ocean, guys can jump out of a helicopter, put a flotation ring on it, get the astronauts out. They were frogmen, they were not SEALs. In 1983, the frogmen, or the UDT guys, were phased out. So from that point on, it was nothing but SEALs. All right, frogman is not an American term. The British and the Italians both had similar groups. The British wore green wetsuits, and as a result, they looked like giant frogs in the water. Our guys liked the term, so they said if they can be frogs, we can be frogs. And even today, SEALs still refer to themselves as frogs. And the admiral who's in charge of Navy Special Warfare, his official title, anybody know? Bullfrog.
I was about to say that.
Bullfrog. Okay. That's good. Let me show you something here. This is my favorite artifact in this room. And this is an actual landing map of Omaha Beach. It's marked top secret. It's also marked bigot. Now that doesn't mean that these guys were prejudiced. Bigot, B-I-G-O-T, is the first 5 letters of the expression to Gibraltar. And Gibraltar is where the British had all of their top secret officers, and they were in the Rock of Gibraltar, which is honeycombed with tunnels and rooms and so on. So anything they had that they wanted to keep secret was bigoted, sent to Gibraltar. All right? Now, Let's take a look at the water. You look at all these red dots in the water, those are the obstructions that the Germans had placed in the water. And these were mapped by the scouts and raiders. You'll also notice there's 16 sets of parallel lines. Each one of these represents a channel that was supposed to be blown through these obstructions. Each of those channels was supposed to be 50 yards wide. The Navy combat demolition units, they were charged with blowing up these obstructions and setting those channels up. They set up and blew 4 complete channels. They partially blew 4 more. So they had 8 operational channels. It almost didn't happen. On here you'll notice a destroyer running very close to the beach. That's the USS Doyle. The USS Doyle, the captain of that USS Doyle took it on his own with no orders whatsoever and went into very shallow water. A Navy destroyer in World War II drew 13 feet of water. He was operating in 13 to 18 feet of water, literally scraping bottom. And what he was doing with his 5-inch guns was lobbing shells into the pillboxes, through the openings in the pillboxes. The big fleet offshore was dropping shells onto the pillboxes, which wasn't doing anything. But this guy was the one that was taking out the pillboxes. There were 3 other destroyers took up behind him, so at one point there was a train of 4 destroyers, and they were just blowing everything up and killing all of these pillboxes. Now once the guys were on the beach, and you got to remember that all of this was going on at the same time these guys are blowing these channels. So off on the heavy destroyer Augusta is one of our big generals, Omar Bradley. You've heard of him. He saw how bad the landing was going, and he wanted to call it off because it was so bad. I mean, the water was literally running red with blood and floating with bodies. He called Eisenhower and asked him if he could call it off. Eisenhower asked him, do you have men on the beach? Yeah. Do you have any material on the beach? Yes. We can't call it off. We have to continue. And of course, as we know what history does. Once the guys got on the beach, they couldn't get off the beach. Number one, they had high cliffs. And number two, there were several valleys coming off the beach. And these valleys were just lined with German machine gun nests. So if a guy even attempted to go up one of these valleys, I mean, there was just no way he was going to make it. So 225 Rangers took it on themselves to climb the cliffs at Punktahawk. They heard that there was some emplacements up on top of the cliffs. 225 started the climb. 108 made it alive. Once they got up there, guess what? No guns. Okay, now what do? Okay, we take out the machine gun nests. So they came around and took out the machine gun nests, and as a result, the guys were able to get off the beach, and the rest, as I say, is history. Now the problem is, once you get all these guys on the beach, they're going to need supplies. There's no real harbor nearby. The nearest big harbor was at Antwerp in Belgium. So the Navy proceeds to build a harbor out of what they call mulberries. And they put caissons into the ground, and they put a pier over it. And they started bringing material onto the beach. 2 days later, a big storm comes along and wipes out the mulberries. But there were still enough left where they were still able to use it. And as a result, the landing at D-Day was a success. But as you can see, what they went through to get these guys on shore. I mean, you have to admire the guts and the dedication of the men of the NCDU, the Army, and everybody else. This was a tough, tough thing. So, take a look at the map. And just, like I say, just give a silent prayer for the dedication of these guys. Have a great day at the museum. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to try to answer them for you. Key word here is try. As you go around the case over and back over there, there's what looks like a book, and that is an actual surrender document of the Philippines when the Japanese surrendered the Philippines. That was signed the day after the signing on the battleship Missouri. So just look at the date on it. It was signed a day later. Also, you notice the Japanese signatures are not in Japanese figures. They're written in regular script.
Why is that?
Why was that? Because most of these guys had been to the United States, had been to schools, and had been to a good many of the war colleges in the United States.
We train them.
We train them.
We tend to do that a lot.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for coming to the museum.
Thank you for the tour.
My dad was in North Africa.
Was he?
California welcomes home its fighting son, General George S. Patton.
Ladies and gentlemen, here comes General Patton to the microphone, standing very erect. And now he's about to speak.
Your Honor, the Mayor, General Doolittle, soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, it's very difficult for me to speak because what you have just seen is not a phantasma, but damn near a reality. And God forgive me, I love that sort of war. Coming over here, over 1,000 miles,
Ladies and gentlemen, they're adjusting the microphone at this time for General Patton. The crowd is not hearing him, and they can hardly see him because of all the smoke from this simulated battle scene down here. They have adjusted the microphone, and he's about to speak again.
coming over here, coming over here, some 11,000 miles in 23 flying hours, there was a very great lesson. The first 4 hours, we passed over a destroyed land. Utterly destroyed. You who have not seen it do not know what hell looks like from the top. That's what Germany looks like. That's what Austria looks like. That's what any place that the 8th Air Force and the 3rd Army worked on looks like. Then we passed over a lot of ocean. Unfortunately, there were no Germans to kill in the ocean, so we couldn't tell what it would look like when the Navy worked on it. But we know from experience that when the Navy works on things, the things are damn well worked over. Then we got to America. And everything was wrong. There were no shell holes. There were no bomb craters. The buildings around the airport were intact. The bridges were there. The houses had roofs. It suddenly occurred to me that those of you who have not been at war do not realize what those of us who have been at war have done for you with our blood and your money. We, your sons, your husbands, your children of all sorts, have kept from America so far, remember that word, so far, the horrors of war. We must continue to keep it. I, as a young lieutenant, wrote a very damn good steeple tape and miscounted the number of times around the course and pulled up reading and the other horse is past me. Don't do that. We are not around the course the last time yet. Don't pull up now. This war is only half won. You must win the rest of it. You must remember this, that from Brest to various towns in southern Germany and Austria, whose names I can't pronounce, but whose places I have removed, the trail of the Third Army in the 19th Tactical Air Command of the 8th Air Force is marked by more than 40,000 white crosses, 40,000 dead Americans. In the hospitals, more than 130,000 of your kindred have been treated. And they have been treated very well. In fact, they have a damn good time in the hospital. In passing, it should be brought out that only 1% of the people who get to the hospital die. That is a very remarkable thing. And it should be very helpful to those of you who have children in war. Remember this, in the last war, a lung shot or a gut shot, that means a shot in the abdomen, you had 20% chance of getting over it. In this war, you had 80% chance. In fact, there's very little risk to it. It's safer to go to war than take a bath in a slippery tub.